Kicking off here, this is John Sundberg with another webcast. We're going to talk about rapid deployment and continuous improvement, which is kind of piggybacking on embrace and extend, which we talked about before. With me, I have Ben Christensen, who oversees product development, James Davies, who oversees all the projects at Kinetic Data, and Matt Howe, who oversees all the customer engagements and projects. So with that, let's talk a little bit about rapid deployment and continuous improvement. James, you kind of had a good description of how that combines with embrace and extend. You want to chat about that?
Yeah, well, with embrace and extend, that's like a philosophical thing. I think about that at like the system level. So within an organization, do we want to rip and replace the systems that we have today, or do we want to just embrace them, extend them, and improve them? So that's like a system level thing. Whereas this topic of rapid deployment and continuous improvement, you can kind of think of that through the lens of a single process. We have this one process that we want to improve over some time, and so that's how I think about rapid deployment and continuous improvement. It's taking this process, figuring out how I can improve it from day to day, and then quickly get it out there into production, measure it, and then improve it some more.
Gotcha. So do you hear about A/B testing quite a bit? That would be a strategy. Obviously, measurement throughout. Those would be a few other strategies. Ben, from like a systems perspective, do you have any strategies for?
Yeah, I think for me, when I think about the idea of continuous improvement and that rapid deployment it's all about you need to reduce risk, because by reducing risk, reducing fear, it allows you to move faster, which means moving forward faster. I think Netflix is a really good example of a technology company who is really striving for that continuous improvement. I don't know if you guys ever heard of, they call it Chaos Monkey. So they've got a system where, they have, hundreds of thousands, millions of users and really complicated, backend structures. Well, what they have is this Chaos Monkey that goes in and it'll randomly turn off services, shut down servers, and they've got their measurements going on to make sure that the system is staying up, with the idea that it's better to learn to react to problems than it is to just constantly fear them. It's like reducing that kind of fear, and it makes their system constantly better by having.
Ben got caught by the Chaos Monkey.
He's back.
Yeah, but okay, so the fear's over. If someone bubbles for a second or two, it will survive just fine, and that's okay. But yeah, what I kind of piggybacking on that Chaos Monkey story, one thing that's kind of nice is they obviously have a framework for that going on. So as they're doing their Chaos Monkey stuff and disabling this feature or starting up another server or swamping the database with a bunch of requests, they at least sort of have a log of what the Chaos Monkey was doing, so that when they have a big issue, they could probably take a look at the log and say, what did the Chaos Monkey do most recently? Maybe that had an impact. And so really, what is that all about? But that's like strategy for improvement, I guess you could say.
To me, that jumps kind of toward the end of our goal, right? I think that it took Netflix, for example, a long time to get to that part where they have that framework to do that sort of testing. No one's going to start off with that level of skill or knowledge. They're going to evolve into that, where that's really becomes your continuous improvement. Jump to the beginning of that process. Where do you start one of these projects, right? You don't really start at the end goal. You can have an idea of where you want to get to, but really you break it off and say, hey, let's climb this mountain one step at a time. What's the first thing? Understand what that process is, and you start to just create it. And like you said, you're embracing and extending, for example, of a process. What's the first thing you start off with? Hey, let's make this part better. And where do you start? You might start with something like that's a lot of manual effort, or you've got a paper-based process, or it's fraught with inconsistency. You want to do something to get things started. So you kind of just pick a process that maybe it's going to have some impact to some people, and then you start to kind of put that together for you, and you kind of create your I don't know, end state of, hey, let's just automate this piece of it. And you start to put that into place. Then you get to go back and then say, okay, now let's say, how did that work? And you measure and kind of evolve that. But I think you start off with just kind of understanding what you want to create, and then start to take baby steps toward that action.
Yeah, John, you have a saying I've always liked. It's ready, fire, aim, and that's all about really. Let's not spend 6 months or a year figuring out and overanalyzing a process. Let's get something out there and get it moving, and then improve it over time. Because in all honesty, in a lot of the projects that we work on, if we take the former approach where we're, spending a year figuring out, the end-to-end process and all of the nooks and crannies of it, by the time it's actually built and then deployed, the process already changed.
Yeah.
One of the great things too is when people argue about what the process is and should be, and you get like, let's just start somewhere, but you get these discussions that are never ending, and everybody's fighting, and you get, okay, like let's get a process that starts happy and ends in a good place. And if you start with arguments, it's not going to get to there very quickly. So it's nice to have somebody just start doing it.
Yeah. And Matt, you and I were at a customer out in the UK, I don't know, year ago or so. And they were going with this whole strategy of let's put something together and then say, what's wrong with that? Versus, hey, everybody, let's get together and, spend 2 months describing a process that quite frankly is mostly obvious, but you can take months and months to divine the obvious if you want. And they were saying, hey, why don't we put something out there that we think is pretty good and then say, what's wrong with that? And it turns out, like using that strategy, a lot of these things that you might have spent a whole bunch of time wrestling about, not relevant.
Right.
So anyways, getting something up quickly and then iterating on it gets you there quicker and move on to the next interesting project.
Who knows if it's even important too until it's out there, right? Like,
Correct.
If there's no volume, well, there goes, a year of time over analyzing something that happens twice a year. It's like,
Yeah. One thing I heard you say earlier, James, is I have a saying, and you said that saying, and I had a different one in my mind at the time, and that was
you have
this
lots
whole
of sayings.
concept of I've got a lot of crazy sayings, but this one's a sausage grinder development. So like some systems that we had experience with prior to the world of kinetic is it was go forward only. You put that steak into the steak grinder and start grinding it, you're coming out with, I'll say, hamburger, but you cannot take that hamburger and go back to steak. And I would say like a fundamental design thing and concept and strategy for a company is to be able to go forward, but then be able to return back or to version, or we use this term cloning, but being able to go back to a previous step in your process or your iteration phase and say, hey, that was a bad angle. Let's try a different angle. Mm-hmm. So architecting your systems and choosing your systems so that you can make that go backwards allows you to go forward without that fear. And I know that's big for us, and it's core to all of our design and our systems.
The kind of monitor approach. The monitor doesn't necessarily mean just take a stage and move forward. It might be, hey, let's back up. We went too far one direction, or too far a different direction, or it's not receiving the results we want. Take a step back and look at that and kind of figure out, hey, is the direction we're going makes sense? Does it kind of fit with the culture or nature of what we're trying to achieve long term? And you might realize that no, back up and start over. But until you start doing something, you don't know that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I've learned, I'm paying attention to a lot of SaaS companies, and they've got measurements here, there, and everywhere around their sales process and marketing stuff. But as a result, because of a lot of that monitoring, and quite frankly, understanding what their key performance indicators are and what their goals are, they can say, hey, we're on track, we're off track way faster. So like typically, I would say in our process space, companies are not into measuring as much as they could be. I mean, certainly you can always measure more, but I think you do need sort of a base set of measurements, and then obviously a kind of an obvious end goal, and then you can tweak quickly. And I think that's an important thing, is to get that measurement just baked in right away.
As you go through that build process, what metrics should we be capturing so we can see, are we getting our improvements we want? It might be customer satisfaction. It could just be, time to delivery is faster, easier process, whatever that might be, but capturing that data and then being able to look at it and holistically. I think that's a big problem. I think for us, we get invested in our processes. We want to see them evolve, but if they're not really getting there, take that step back, and it's okay to go, hey, change and improve and adjust, maybe dramatically so. We're not getting what we want to change it, or we are getting what we want, push it harder, to get further down that path.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to push that one step further, key performance indicators is one type of monitoring. Another type is, when you're starting with the happy path development of you're going to 80% of what you're doing is working, and you haven't quite gotten to those edge cases yet. When you can handle those in a very generic way. So for example, when you run into a problem, you just create an ad hoc problem or ad hoc issue that then a human can manually go through and kind of have this unstructured process. Well, if you do that a few times and you've baked into your system the ability to log that or audit that or have capture notes, now as you're going through, you're able to see, all right, well, where we didn't have a predefined automated plan in place, what were humans doing to solve problems? Because they're still solving the problems, right? They're just not going unsolved. And then you can slowly adopt those and automate them and add more and more efficiency as it's warranted. And like you guys mentioned, maybe those edge cases happen once or twice a year and it's not worth spending time automating. Or maybe you're seeing now, oh, we're doing these 10 times a week and we can really gain some time back by automating some of the edge case issues that can occur throughout a process.
Good comment there, Ben. Another thing that I just through project experience, one of the things I see companies do is they're going to kick off a new project and they've got all these visions for what the new process might be. And they don't really, quite frankly, start measuring until they kind of have that process stood up. And then they start measuring then, and then how can we make it better? How can we make it better? Which is a strategy. And however, I would sort of suggest it's a good thing to measure when you're bad. Like start measuring right away and say, you know what? It takes us 3 weeks to stand up a server. Okay, that's too long. We're going to do this project where you can stand up a server in 24 hours. Well, it doesn't really make sense to start testing or monitoring and go, okay, 26 hours. And now 2 weeks later, we got it on 25 and then 24. You really kind of want to take from the current reality and start measuring then, and then show that you took this 3-week project and got it down to 24 hours. The reason for that is I think it's good to be able to show and document old case to end good state. And you've done that a number of times, you will find that you will get support for new projects if you can show past projects are going from 3 weeks to 1 day. So I think it's important that people just quite frankly start measuring today, even when their processes aren't ideal. And then when they make them better, they show a great business case for their next project.
I think there's some fear along the sides of like exposing yourself as having problems. And I had a personal trainer for a while and he wanted to measure my body fat. And I'm like, no, we don't need to know that. And he goes, you'll never know what your improvement is until you know what it is today. It just is what it is, and you improve. And it was great. You got to see the benefits, and you got to see, hey, I am making progress. Even if it's not leaps and bounds, some improvement is improvement. It's step by step. And that's great to celebrate those wins you are gaining along the way. Even if it was, you don't see like the end state for a long time, you've made some progress. People start to, like John, get momentum behind you, and that starts to kind of build on itself. And then you have more business in the pipeline and those kind of things, and you have more people encouraging you to move on.
So kind of the next kind of piece to this whole rapid deployment, continuous improvement is the idea of expanding. Ben, do you have some comments on expanding?
Sure. We talked a lot about improvement and how you iterate in order to add additional pathways through your process or add additional efficiencies. But that's kind of specific to one process or one set of processes. At a certain point, once you're, have gotten, you're never really done with a process, but when you're at a milestone that you're comfortable with, you usually want to take what you've learned there and apply it in other areas or build out new processes, right? As we're looking to, address this kind of digital transformation, part of that is growth and continuing to give those benefits and the offerings that we have, usually picking and building the biggest bang for buck to start with. You're adding your more and more leaves as you get further out so that your overall efficiency is going up, but you're waiting until you're ready, until you've kind of vetted that through, your most important or your highest throughput or the ones that need the most change or enhancement.
Sure. I could see like continuous improvement. Basically, we solved, we'll say, part 1. Now we can work on part 2, and kind of expand over time through just continuous improvement. So you're getting value quickly with a shorter version or a less steps part of the process, maybe less people involved. But I could also see like in expanding, I know, James, some of our previous projects, we usually start with an initial set of people with an initial goal. But quite quickly, within a couple of months, other groups are seeing value and want to participate where they were not intending to at all at the beginning. And
yeah, expanding to me could also mean taking a process, and this is kind of goes hand in hand with improving, but then extending and expanding into other systems in order to maybe automate some tasks along the way. And in doing that, you're kind of gluing together this ecosystem of different systems and really maximizing your return on investment.
Yeah, one of the things you think about our process we're kind of talking about earlier is you kind of start with these very kind of small subsets and they grow, but those subsets can be part of bigger processes. So you can have one that's done that becomes part of a larger process as well. So we have the option of doing part A. Maybe now an onboarding process uses that part A we built before, now adds a part B. Eventually add a part C, you kind of expand it. Now you've got this huge onboarding process that really touches all your systems, integrates to those things across your entire environment. And so taking those lessons you learn and those strategies and applying them, and you get quicker and faster. Plus you have the external momentum of people seeing your previous wins. They're on board, they're helping you out. You kind of get that rolling momentum. You capitalize on that and say, hey, let's expand this into other areas. And so everybody gets the same benefits.
Yeah. I think one of the outcomes of this strategy of rapid deployment, continuous improvement is you're kind of like, you've got we'll call it the initial kernel of the solution, and you start adding to it and adding to it. And as you're doing that, you're kind of challenging your initial design, your initial thoughts, etc. And as you do that, and as you put more on, you're really sort of solidifying and justifying previous decisions. So it kind of strengthens, I would say, your core system when you start extending it and pushing it out a little bit. And that's a great thing to end up being able to extend in multiple ways and really sort of leveraging your initial build outs. So,
and really it comes back around, then you have to start over again. Now you're going to improve that first process to learn what you did as you expanded, kind of just in that cycle kind of continues, and you kind of keep evolving different parts of your system to kind of make them more robust, keep them current, keep talking to these new parts of your environment you extend into it now.
I know Ben leading up the product side, that's like a really fundamental thing in the design that we're doing, is always making this initial piece rock solid, really thinking about the permutations that we go through, and then happily give it to customers to expand. You want to chat about that at all?
Well, it's almost like too, when you don't know, you can't validate that foundation until you expand past the initial, we call it use case or process that you're going for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry to cut you off, Ben.
So, no, that's fine. Yeah, I think that part of expansion is taking, your first time through, you're going to learn something. Your second time through, you're going to learn something else. And so really think of it like cyclical is a really key word there in terms of just overall growth of a solution. And oftentimes, if you adopt a more of a grand planning where you need to have all of it designed and thought out before you really start, you can end up with a lot of problems because you might not actually have all of the different use cases well understood yet, right? And so oftentimes when people become they over abstract or they over generalize or they overcomplicate, they're doing that based on assumptions that don't end up being true. So when you are starting with your most important process is adding, and then after you've seen the patterns, that's where you're looking to then maybe convert some of the duplicated areas into shared areas, but you've seen those patterns, right? You're iterating and improving in a very safe way, in a way that didn't really slow your velocity to accomplishing your goals.
All right. Well, hey, that's kind of the rapid deployment, continuous improvement. We kind of built a graphic that talks about the different pieces, which is build, share, monitor, improve, and expand. And I think we kind of touched on all that stuff. So with that, let's wrap up this webcast, and let's look forward to the next one. Thanks.
Yeah.